The gunshot echoed across the plains of Wyoming Territory, 1868, as Willow Forrester clutched her swollen belly and ran through the tall prairie grass. Her father's threat still rang in her ears, more terrifying than the bullet he'd fired into the air as she fled the only home she'd ever known. At 19, unmarried and with child, she had become an outcast in the small town of Genoa. The setting sun cast long shadows as Willow's strength began to fail her. 6 months pregnant, she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The nearest town was 15 miles away and night was falling fast. When she spotted a small homestead in the distance, lights glowing warmly in the windows, she hesitated only briefly before desperation drove her forward. Xavier Quinn wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished mending the broken fence post. At 32, he had spent the last 5 years building his ranch from nothing, working the land until his hands bled and his back ached. But the Double Q Ranch was finally beginning to thrive, with a decent herd of cattle and enough acreage to expand. What he didn't have was family, something that gnawed at him during the quiet evenings alone in his cabin. The knock at his door startled him. Visitors were rare this far from town, especially after sunset. Xavier grabbed his revolver from the table, approaching cautiously. "Who's there?" He called. "Please," came a soft female voice, trembling with exhaustion. "I need help." Xavier opened the door to find a young woman with dirt-streaked cheeks and wild honey-brown hair. Her simple calico dress was torn, and her eyes, hazel and frightened, met his briefly before dropping to the ground. But what caught his attention most was her condition, the rounded belly that spoke of advanced pregnancy. "My God, miss, what happened to you?" Xavier stepped aside, ushering her in. Willow's voice broke as she crossed the threshold. "My father, the townspeople, they said my child was a sin, that I'd brought shame on everyone." She swayed suddenly, and Xavier lunged forward, catching her before she collapsed. He carried her to the small bed in the corner of his cabin, his heart racing with concern and something else, a strange protective instinct that surfaced immediately. "You're safe now," he said firmly, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup. "Drink this, slowly." Willow sipped the water, her hands still shaking. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. "They were going to send me away to a place for fallen women. My father said he'd rather see me dead than bringing a bastard into the world." Xavier's jaw tightened. "No child is a sin," he said with conviction. "I've been hoping for a neighbor, someone to help tend this place. Looks to me like I might have been waiting for a son all along." Willow looked up at him, confused. "Sir?" "Xavier Quinn," he said, extending his calloused hand. "And you can stay here as long as you need. The child, too." "Willow Forrester," she replied, cautiously taking his hand. "But why would you help me? You don't even know me." Xavier moved to the stove, stoking the fire and placing a pot of stew over the flames. "I know what it's like to be alone," he said simply. "And no one should face that, especially not when they're expecting." That night, Willow slept in Xavier's bed while he made a pallet near the door. She dreamed of her mother, who had died 3 years earlier, the only person who might have stood between her and her father's rage when she'd revealed her condition. Morning came with the crow of Xavier's rooster. Willow woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The smell of coffee and frying bacon reminded her, and she struggled to sit up, her back aching from the pregnancy and her desperate flight. Xavier was already dressed, his dark hair damp from washing, his tall frame bent over the stove. He turned when he heard her moving. "Morning," he said, a slight smile softening his weathered features. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Willow admitted, though her voice was still tentative. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Quinn." "Xavier," he corrected. "And it's no trouble. I've got eggs and bacon nearly ready." As they ate breakfast, Xavier explained his situation. The ranch was growing but required more hands than his own. He'd been considering hiring help but preferred the idea of a family working together. "I don't know the first thing about ranching," Willow confessed. "You'll learn," Xavier assured her. "And after the baby comes, there'll be plenty you can do around here. Garden needs tending, chickens too, and I reckon I could use some civilizing influence." Willow studied him cautiously. "Are you proposing some kind of arrangement, Mr. Xavier?" "I'm offering you a safe place," he clarified. "Nothing improper. I've got a small room off the back of the cabin, been using it for storage, but it could be yours and the little ones. You work as you're able, I provide shelter and protection." It seemed too good to be true, which made Willow wary. Men didn't offer something for nothing, not in her experience. And when the child is born, Xavier's eyes, blue as the Wyoming sky, held her steadily. "A child needs a name," he said. "I'd be willing to give mine if you'd accept. Not saying I expect anything from you but honest work and maybe some company at supper. Been alone too long out here." Willow's breath caught. "You'd claim another man's child." "I'd claim a child that needs claiming," Xavier corrected. "The rest, well, that would be up to you in your own time. No pressure, no expectations." The proposal was startling in its simplicity and generosity. Still, Willow hesitated. "The father," she began, then stopped. "He was passing through Genoa. Said he'd send for me from Denver. I waited 3 months before I realized he wasn't coming back." Xavier nodded, no judgment in his expression. "His loss," he said quietly. Over the following weeks, Willow settled into life at the Double Q. True to his word, Xavier cleared out the small room, adding a proper bed and even constructing a small cradle from pine boards. He taught her about the ranch, how to feed the chickens, collect eggs, tend the vegetable garden that had been neglected. For her part, Willow brought order to the cabin. She swept and scrubbed, mended Xavier's worn shirts, and cooked meals that were a vast improvement over his basic fare. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the days. In the evenings, Xavier would read aloud from one of his few books, mostly practical guides to ranching, but also a dog-eared copy of Robinson Crusoe that had been his father's. Willow listened, sewing baby clothes from fabric Xavier had ridden into town to purchase. It was during those quiet evenings that Willow began to see Xavier Quinn for who he truly was, not just a rough rancher, but a thoughtful, intelligent man who had carved out his existence through sheer determination. He spoke little of his past, but she gathered he had left home young, worked cattle drives across the territory, saved every penny until he could buy his own land. For Xavier, Willow's presence transformed the lonely cabin into something that felt like home. Her soft humming as she worked, the scent of bread baking in the oven, even the way sunlight caught in her hair as she hung laundry on the line, all of it filled a void he hadn't fully acknowledged. The baby grew active, kicking and stretching, and sometimes in the evenings when Willow winced at a particularly forceful movement, Xavier would look up from his book, concern etched on his face. "Does it hurt?" he asked one night. Willow smiled, placing a hand on her belly. "Not exactly." "It's strange, but wonderful too. Would you?" She hesitated, then continued, "Would you like to feel?" Xavier set the book aside, moving cautiously to sit beside her. When she took his large, work-roughened hand and placed it on the swell of her abdomen, his expression transformed as he felt the strong kick against his palm. "He's a fighter," Xavier said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're so certain it's a boy," Willow observed. Xavier's smile was gentle. "Just a feeling, but girl or boy doesn't matter. Strong either way." As her time grew closer, Xavier made several trips to town, returning with supplies: soft flannel for diapers, a tin of powder, tiny knitted booties purchased from the general store. He also arranged for the midwife, Mrs. Abernathy, to come when the time arrived. "Word travels fast in Genoa," he told Willow after one such trip. "People are talking about us, about you living here." Willow froze in the act of stirring a pot of beans. "Do they know who I am?" "Some might guess," Xavier admitted. "But I made it clear to anyone who asked that you're under my protection now, and that anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." The protective fierceness in his voice warmed Willow more than she cared to admit. No one had ever stood up for her that way, certainly not the man who had sweet-talked his way into her affections, then disappeared. One evening, as autumn painted the surrounding hills in golds and reds, Willow felt the first contraction. She gasped, dropping the plate she'd been drying. Xavier was at her side instantly. "Is it time?" Willow nodded, fear and excitement mingling in her eyes. "I think so." Xavier had already saddled his fastest horse, and he rode hard for town, returning with Mrs. Abernathy within 2 hours. The midwife, a stout woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and capable hands, shooed Xavier from the cabin with instructions to boil water and then make himself scarce. He paced outside for hours, the night growing cool as he listened to Willow's muffled cries. When the baby's first wail pierced the night, Xavier stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. Several more minutes passed before Mrs. Abernathy opened the door. "You've got yourself a fine, healthy son, Mr. Quinn," she announced, her stern face softening. "And the mother's doing well." Xavier entered the cabin cautiously. Willow was propped up in bed, her face flushed and damp with sweat, but radiant. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet him," Willow invited, her voice tired but happy. Xavier approached, feeling suddenly awkward, as if his large frame and rough ways might somehow damage the tiny being. He peered down at the red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "He's perfect," Xavier whispered, overcome with emotion he couldn't name. "Would you like to hold him?" Willow asked. Carefully, Xavier took the newborn, cradling him with surprising gentleness. The baby's eyes, unfocused and dark blue, seemed to look right through him. "Hello, son," he murmured. Mrs. Abernathy watched the scene with knowing eyes. "What will you name him?" she asked. Willow looked up at Xavier, uncertainty in her expression. They hadn't discussed names, hadn't discussed much of anything about what would happen after the birth. "Samuel," Xavier said decisively. "After my father. If that suits you," he added, glancing at Willow. She smiled, nodding. "Samuel Quinn. It's a good, strong name." Mrs. Abernathy stayed the night, sleeping in the chair by the fire. The next morning, after checking on mother and child one last time, she prepared to leave. "I'll be back in 3 days to see how you're all getting on," she said. Meanwhile, plenty of rest for the mother and Mr. Quinn. "Yes, madam. That offer you made in town about making things right. Now would be the time, I think." Xavier nodded, color rising in his cheeks. Once the midwife had gone, he approached Willow, who was nursing Samuel by the window. "Willow," he began, suddenly nervous. "I spoke with Reverend Thomas when I went for Mrs. Abernathy." She looked up, her expression guarded. "Oh, I told him I'd like him to come out here, perform a ceremony, if you're willing." Xavier cleared his throat. "I meant what I said that first night. The boy needs a name, a family, and I'd be honored to provide that." Willow regarded him steadily. "Are you asking me to marry you, Xavier Quinn?" "I am," he confirmed. "Not just for the boy's sake, though that's reason enough. These past months, having you here, it's been—" He struggled for words, unused to expressing such sentiments. "It's been right," he finished simply. Willow considered his words, studied his earnest face. This wasn't love, not the way the novels described it, not the breathless passion she'd felt for Samuel's father. But there was something genuine and solid in Xavier's offer: respect, partnership, safety. And perhaps, with time, something deeper might grow. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll marry you, Xavier." They were wed 3 days later in a simple ceremony in the cabin. Reverend Thomas, a thin man with kind eyes, brought his wife as witness. Mrs. Abernathy attended as well, holding Samuel while Xavier and Willow spoke their vows. If the Reverend had any thoughts about the timing of the marriage and the newborn's arrival, he kept them to himself. His wife, however, made a point of embracing Willow warmly. "You found a good man," she whispered. "They're rare enough in these parts." Life settled into a new pattern. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, often taking Samuel with him for chores around the ranch, the baby secured in a sling Willow had fashioned. He spoke constantly to the boy, explaining everything from how to mend fences to the best way to judge a calf's health. Willow watched their bond grow with a mixture of joy and something like envy. Xavier had accepted Samuel without question, giving him the Quinn name and all that came with it. Yet their own relationship remained cordial but distant. They shared a home, meals, the daily work of the ranch, but Xavier continued to sleep on a pallet near the hearth, never presuming upon their marriage vows. As winter blanketed the ranch in snow, the small family grew closer by necessity, confined to the cabin during the worst storms. Willow learned to recognize Xavier's moods, the furrow between his brows when he was concerned about the cattle in the cold, the rare, full smile that transformed his face when Samuel achieved some small milestone. One evening, as howling winds rattled the windows, Xavier returned from checking the animals, stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's getting worse," he reported, hanging his coat by the door. "But the livestock are secure." Willow handed him a cup of hot coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "Samuel's asleep," she said, nodding toward the cradle where the 4-month-old lay peacefully. Xavier moved to look down at his son, his expression softening as it always did. "Growing fast," he observed. "Be riding his own horse before we know it." "You're good with him," Willow said. "Better than I would have expected from," she stopped abruptly, "from a bachelor rancher." Xavier finished with a slight smile. "I had 4 younger siblings, helped raise them after our mother died." It was more information about his past than he'd ever volunteered before. Willow sat at the table, inviting him to join her. "You never mentioned brothers and sisters." Xavier sighed, taking the seat across from her. "They're back east, Pennsylvania. Haven't seen them in nearly 10 years. "Why did you leave?" Xavier's fingers tightened around his cup. "My father remarried a year after my mother passed. His new wife. She wanted her own family, not another woman's children. When father died, there wasn't enough money to keep the farm. My stepmother sold it, took her children and what little inheritance there was, and left my siblings with various relatives. And you?" I was 17. "Old enough to make my own way." His expression was distant, remembering. "Worked odd jobs, headed west with a cattle drive, kept moving until I found this place." He looked around the cabin, his gaze lingering on Samuel's cradle. "First time I've stopped running, I suppose. Don't you miss them?" "Your siblings," Xavier nodded slowly. "Every day. William would be 25 now, Martha 23, the twins Michael and Mary 21. His smile was sad. "I send letters when I can, money too, but it's not the same as being there." Willow reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You've made a new family now," she said softly. Xavier turned his hand, gripping hers. "Have I?" His blue eyes searched her face. "We made a bargain, Willow. I've tried to honor my part without asking more than you were willing to give." Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You've been more than honorable," she acknowledged. "I wasn't sure. That is, I thought perhaps you only married me for Samuel's sake." "I married you for his sake," Xavier agreed, "but also because I admired your courage, your strength. And because I was lonely, if I'm being honest." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "These months together, they've been the happiest I've known." The confession hung in the air between them, changing something fundamental in their relationship. Willow stood, still holding his hand, and drew him up with her. "It's cold tonight," she said simply. "Too cold for you to sleep by the hearth." That night they shared a bed as husband and wife for the first time. Xavier's touch was gentle, reverent, his kisses gradually growing more confident as Willow responded. Their coming together wasn't the wild passion of youthful impulse that had resulted in Samuel, but something deeper, a conscious choice, a promise, the beginning of love rather than its climax. Afterward, with Willow's head resting on his chest, Xavier stroked her hair and made another confession. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "Of what?" "That you'd leave. Once Samuel was born, once you were strong enough. That you'd realize you could do better than a rough rancher who can barely write his own name." Willow propped herself up to look at him. "Is that what you think of yourself?" Xavier shrugged, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "I know what I am, and what I'm not." "I know what you are too," Willow said firmly. "You're the man who took in a desperate stranger, who claimed another man's child as his own, who works from sunup to sundown to build something that will last." She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "You're the kind of man I want my son to become." As spring renewed the land, so too did it bring new growth to the Quinn family. Xavier expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for themselves and another for Samuel. He hired 2 ranch hands, brothers named Joseph and Thomas Reeves, which freed him to spend more time with his family. Willow planted an extensive garden, preserving fruits and vegetables for the coming winter. She also began selling eggs and butter in town, establishing herself as a respectable rancher's wife. If there were whispers about her past, they were countered by the obvious devotion between her and Xavier and their mutual adoration of little Samuel. One summer morning, as Willow hung laundry while Samuel played on a blanket nearby, she spotted riders approaching. Her heart stuttered with fear. Her first thought was of her father, but as they drew closer, she realized it was Xavier returning early from town, accompanied by a young man she didn't recognize. Xavier dismounted quickly, his face alight with excitement. "Willow," he called, "look who I found in town, just stepped off the stage." The stranger dismounted more carefully. He was about 25, with the same dark hair as Xavier but slighter in build. "This is William," Xavier said, clapping the young man on the shoulder. "My brother." William Quinn smiled, removing his hat. "Mrs. Quinn," he said politely, "my brother's letters have told me so much about you and the boy. I hope you'll forgive the surprise visit." "Of course," Willow said, extending her hand. "Your family, you're always welcome here." Xavier scooped up Samuel, who giggled in delight at seeing his father. "And this, William, is your nephew, Samuel Quinn." William's eyes widened as he took in the child. "He has the Quinn look about him, that's certain," he observed, offering a finger for the baby to grasp. "Father's eyes, wouldn't you say, Xavier?" Xavier nodded, something in his expression shifting as he looked between his brother and his son. Willow caught at a flash of uncertainty, quickly masked. Over dinner, William explained that he'd finally saved enough to travel west. "Your last letter mentioned expanding the ranch," he told Xavier. "I thought perhaps there might be a place for me here." "Always," Xavier assured him. "This land is as much yours as mine. Quinn land." Later, after William had been settled in the newly constructed bunkhouse with the Reeves brothers, Xavier was unusually quiet as he helped Willow clean up from the meal. "Are you not happy to see your brother?" she asked finally. Xavier looked up from the dish he was drying. "Of course I am. It's just—" He set the plate down carefully. "His comment about Samuel having the Quinn look it reminded me." "Reminded you of what?" "That he's not mine. Not by blood." The admission seemed to pain him. "I've thought of him as my son for so long now, sometimes I forget." Willow moved to him, taking the dishcloth from his hands. "He is yours," she said firmly. "In every way that matters. You're the only father he knows or will ever know." Xavier pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "And you, Willow, are you mine too?" She leaned back to look into his face. "I've been yours since the night you said my child wasn't a sin," she told him. "I just didn't know it yet." William's arrival marked the beginning of an era of growth for the Double Q Ranch. With another Quinn to help manage the expanding herd and land, Xavier found more time to spend with his wife and son. He taught Samuel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, his pride evident whenever the child showed aptitude for ranch life. Willow's garden flourished, and she began selling preserves along with her dairy products. Her trips to town became social occasions rather than anxious errands, as she established friendships with other ranchers' wives and the townspeople of Genoa. On one such trip, nearly 2 years after her arrival at the Double Q, Willow was selecting fabric at the general store when a familiar voice froze her in place. "Well, if it isn't my wayward daughter." Willow turned slowly to face her father, Xavier Forrester. He looked older, the lines in his face deeper, his once robust frame thinner, but his eyes still held the hard judgment she remembered. "Father," she acknowledged, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I didn't know you were still in Genoa." "Where else would I be?" he asked bitterly. "Though I considered moving after the shame you brought on our name." Willow straightened her shoulders. "I have a new name now," she said. "I'm Mrs. Quinn." Something like surprise flickered across Jeremiah's face. "You married?" "I did, a good man, a rancher with land of his own." "And the—" Jeremiah couldn't seem to bring himself to say child. "My son is thriving," Willow said, a protective edge entering her voice. "His name is Samuel Quinn, and he's the joy of his father's life." Before her father could respond, the store's door opened and Xavier entered, Samuel balanced on his hip. The boy, nearly 2 years old now with a mop of dark curls and bright blue eyes, spotted Willow immediately. "Mama," he called, squirming to get down. Xavier set him on his feet and Samuel ran to Willow, who knelt to embrace him. When she stood, Xavier was at her side, his hand resting protectively at the small of her back. "Everything all right?" he asked, sensing the tension. Willow took a breath. "Xavier, this is my father, Xavier Forrester. Father, my husband, Xavier Quinn." The two men sized each other up. Xavier extended his hand first. "Mr. Forrester." After a moment's hesitation, Jeremiah shook it. "Quinn." His gaze dropped to Samuel, who was partially hidden behind Willow's skirts. "So this is our son," Xavier said, his tone making it clear there was no room for debate on the matter. "Samuel." Jeremiah's expression was unreadable. "He has the look of your side," he told Xavier, though there was a questioning note in his voice. "The Quinn look," Xavier agreed smoothly, picking up Samuel. "We should get back to the ranch before dark, Willow. Your father is welcome to call on us if he'd like to know his grandson." The invitation hung in the air, both an olive branch and a challenge. Jeremiah looked between his daughter and the family she had made without him. "Perhaps," he said finally, nodding stiffly before turning away. On the ride home, Willow was quiet, processing the unexpected encounter. Xavier waited until Samuel had fallen asleep in her arms before asking, "Are you all right?" "I thought I'd be more afraid," she admitted. "Seeing him again, but I wasn't." You've changed, Xavier observed. Grown stronger. Willow leaned against his shoulder. Because of you. Because you believed in me when no one else did. 2 weeks later, to Willow's astonishment, Jeremiah Forrester appeared at the double Q. He came on a Sunday afternoon, dressed in his church clothes, his manner stiff but not hostile. Xavier invited him in, offering coffee while Willow recovered from her surprise. Samuel, initially shy, gradually warmed to the stranger, especially when Jeremiah produced a small wooden horse from his pocket. I made them for you when you were small, he told Willow awkwardly. Found this one in the attic. It was the closest thing to an apology she was likely to get. Willow accepted it as such, serving her father a slice of apple pie and telling him about the ranch, about her garden, about William's arrival and the expansion of the herd. Before leaving, Jeremiah took Xavier aside. Willow couldn't hear what was said, but when Xavier returned to the house, his expression was thoughtful. "What did he say to you?" she asked that night as they prepared for bed. Xavier was quiet for a moment, removing his boots. "He asked if I knew Samuel wasn't my blood. I told him I've known from the beginning." He looked up at Willow. He seemed surprised, said most men wouldn't claim another man's mistake. "And what did you say to that?" Willow asked, her throat tight. "I told him Samuel wasn't a mistake. That he was the best thing that ever happened to me, because he brought you into my life." Xavier moved to her, taking her hands in his. "And I told him if he ever referred to my son as a mistake or a sin again, he wouldn't be welcome here, grandfather or not." Tears filled Willow's eyes. "I love you, Xavier Quinn," she whispered, the words coming easily now after nearly 2 years of marriage. Xavier cupped her face in his hands. "And I love you, Willow Quinn. Have from the start, I think." That summer brought another change to the double Q. Willow missed her monthly courses, and by August, there was no denying the familiar symptoms. When she told Xavier, his joy was boundless. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while Samuel watched, giggling. "Another Quinn," Xavier said, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Samuel's going to be a big brother." As her pregnancy progressed, Willow found herself comparing the experiences. Where her first had been shadowed by shame and fear, this one was celebrated. Xavier was attentive, insisting she rest more, taking on additional household tasks despite her protests. "You're carrying precious cargo," he would say, kissing her forehead. "Let me help." Jeremiah Forrester became a semi-regular visitor, his relationship with his daughter slowly mending. He never directly apologized for his harsh treatment, but his actions spoke volumes. The rocking chair he built for the new baby, the offers to watch Samuel so Xavier and Willow could have an evening to themselves. When spring arrived again, so did the Quinns' second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Xavier's mother. She was fair where Samuel was dark, delicate where he was sturdy, but unmistakably a Quinn with her father's blue eyes. Standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Willow nurse their newborn while 3-year-old Samuel peered curiously at his sister, Xavier felt a completeness he had never imagined possible. "I used to wonder why I came to Wyoming," he said softly. "Why I chose this particular plot of land, why I worked so hard for something I thought I'd enjoy alone." Willow looked up, her smile tender. "And now I know I was building it for you, for them." Xavier crossed the room, sitting beside her on the bed. Samuel climbed into his lap immediately, and Xavier's arm encircled them all. "For us." Word spread through Genoa and beyond about the Quinn family and their thriving ranch. The same townsfolk who had once condemned Willow now praised her preserves at the county fair, sought her advice on gardening, invited the Quinns to social gatherings. William married a shopkeeper's daughter named Sarah, building a smaller cabin on the eastern edge of the Quinn property. Joseph Reeves courted and wed the schoolteacher, settling nearby as well. What had once been Xavier's solitary holding gradually became a community. 5 years after Willow's desperate flight from her father's house, the Double Q hosted a harvest celebration. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, lanterns hung from trees, and a trio of musicians played lively tunes while children darted between the adults. Samuel, now 7 and the spitting image of Xavier despite no blood relation, kept close watch over his 5-year-old sister Elizabeth and 3-year-old brother James. The latest Quinn, baby Margaret, slept peacefully in Willow's arms as she chatted with the other women. Jeremiah Forrester, now a regular fixture at the ranch and known to the children as Grandpa, sat with Xavier and William, discussing plans for the coming winter. The 3 men had formed an unlikely alliance, with Jeremiah's carpentry skills proving valuable as the ranch expanded. As evening fell and the gathering grew more relaxed, Xavier sought out his wife. Finding her seated on the porch, watching the dancing, he extended his hand. "Dance with me, Mrs. Quinn," Willow smiled, passing baby Margaret to her eager grandmother William's mother-in-law and taking Xavier's hand. He led her into the circle of dancers, his arm secure around her waist as they moved to the music. "Happy?" Xavier asked, though he could see the answer in her eyes. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," Willow confirmed, leaning into his solid strength. "Remember what you said that first night? That you'd been waiting for a son?" Xavier nodded, his gaze finding Samuel among the children playing tag nearby. "Best wait of my life," he said softly, "though I got much more than I bargained for." His eyes returned to Willow, full of the love that had grown steadily over their years together. "We both did," Willow agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss her husband as the music played on, their family and friends celebrating around them, the ranch that had once been a lonely outpost now the heart of a thriving community. The seasons continued to turn, bringing changes to the Wyoming Territory and to the Quinn family. Samuel grew tall and strong, taking on more responsibilities at the ranch as he approached his teens. Elizabeth, with her mother's grace and her father's determination, excelled in school and developed a talent for working with horses that amazed even the most experienced hands. James, quieter than his siblings but just as capable, showed a gift for numbers and often helped Xavier keep the ranch accounts. Little Margaret, the baby of the family, was doted on by all, her sunny nature making her the darling of the growing Quinn clan. When Samuel turned 15, Willow sometimes caught Xavier watching the boy with a mixture of pride and something like wonder. One evening, after the younger children were asleep, she found her husband on the porch, gazing at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling beside him on the bench he'd built when they were expecting Elizabeth. Xavier smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Just thinking about Samuel," he admitted. "How different his life might have been, how different all our lives might have been if you hadn't found your way to my door that night." Willow leaned against him, drawing comfort from his familiar warmth. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking us in, claiming a child that wasn't yours by blood." Xavier looked down at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "Samuel is my son in every way that matters, and you." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still sending shivers through her after all these years. "You're the heart of everything we've built here." Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Outside, the stars watched over the ranch that had grown from a struggling homestead to one of the most prosperous in the territory. And between them, on the porch where they had spent countless evenings, Xavier and Willow Quinn held each other close, their love a testament to the family they had created not through blood, but through choice, commitment, and the courage to see beyond society's harsh judgments to the truth. That no child is a sin, and that family is defined by love, not convention. "They said your child was a sin," Xavier murmured, kissing her temple. "But I knew from the moment I saw him that I'd been waiting for a son all along." Willow smiled, turning her face up to his. "And I'd been waiting for you, though I didn't know it until you opened your door that night." Their lips met in a kiss as deep and true as their bond, a love that had begun with compassion and grown through shared struggles, small triumphs, and the daily work of building a life together. As the stars shimmered overhead and the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines, the Quinn family slept safely beneath their roof, secure in the knowledge that they had found their way home.